Hey everyone, I hope all of you are having an amazing day and I hope all of you are ready to feel extremely guilty because today we are actually going to build the Church of Isla la Pacífica, which, like I tend to do, starts out somewhat small and then ends up being way too big. But anyway, I actually wanted to start today's video off by asking you guys a question because I've been really feeling in the mood to build in Isla la Pacífica lately, so that might mean that there's a second episode this week. Although I can't say that for certain. But for the next episode, I'm actually going to let you guys decide what we're going to build. Because I have two ideas for what we're going to build. One is the entrance to Isla la Pacífica, which is most likely going to be in some kind of harbor setting. The other one is the governor's mansion, which is most likely going to be a habitat of some sort. So I'm going to let you guys decide what we're going to build in the next episode. Again, I can't guarantee that the next episode will be this week, but it's most likely going to be this week. But I can say that whatever you guys don't decide on, we will just build later on. So do put down your answers in the comments down below, and then we will build that in the next episode. So either the governor's mansion or the entrance to Isla la Pacífica. So with that being said, actually I should probably start talking about what we're going to build. So as I said, we're building the Church of Isla la Pacífica, which was kind of a difficult thing to build because, well, of multiple reasons actually. Because first of all, it's the first building in Isla la Pacífica, so that already means that there's a lot weighing down on this church, because if I mess up this church, then I potentially mess up the rest of Isla la Pacífica. So no pressure on me to actually make this church look good. But also, it's an art or architecture style that I haven't really touched upon, which would have been maybe easy because it's actually Baroque, which is somewhat inspired by Greek and Roman architecture and art. So there is some points that I'm familiar with, but still it's somewhat different. And then also it's on another continent, so whatever I know from like Baroque in Europe, of course, is completely or somewhat differently at least in the Caribbean. So being Isla la Pacífica actually made it harder to build this church because I of course know Baroque churches in Europe, but they look different in a lot of ways actually in the Caribbean. So I had to actually look up various churches in the Caribbean. One of the reference churches might not be in the Caribbean, might be debatable, but two of the churches that inspired this one were in Cuba. The other one, which is debatable, is in Colombia. I think one of them is the Cathedral of Havana. The other one was, it's a town called Trinidad in Cuba, even though Trinidad is also an island on its own. But the third church that this Church of Isla la Pacífica was inspired by is actually in Colombia, because I don't know if it's the main church of Cartagena, which is the name of the town, which I probably completely butchered, but well, let's just say the bell tower of the Church of Isla la Pacífica is mainly inspired by the bell towers of a church in Cartagena, which again, I will probably butcher that name whenever I say that, but I think you guys expect that from me now on. But so, it is a Baroque church, which I actually really like that art style. It's a little bit, well, I would say it's sometimes a little bit over the top with all the decorations, and if my history knowledge serves me correct, the Baroque movement, or at least, well, let's say in the church, the Baroque movement was, from what I know from art history and just history in general, was meant to draw the people back into the churches of the Catholic Church after or in the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation, or as like a counter movement against the Protestant Reformation, so that people would return to the church because of all the art and just how impressive the buildings were. Yeah, the Church of Isla la Pacífica is not actually that, well, fancy, I would say. It's not that in your face. It's actually pretty muted because, as I said, this church ended up being way too big, and actually I really mean that, because it's way too big as a church for the island of Isla la Pacífica. The town that I've planned out, which I, in the start of this video, or at least the start of the building of this video, removed a lot of trees for. So yes, in the following episodes we will just continuously remove all the trees that I basically got traumatized by building Isla la Pacífica. So that's actually somewhat therapeutic, just because it was just like, I think by the end of building the island or the base map of Isla la Pacífica, which I need to mention is actually also already on the workshop, so if you guys want to build in Isla la Pacífica, you can totally do that. But let's just say building all the trees, kind of traumatizing. So it is actually very therapeutic to actually remove them. But the church is actually, let's say, half the size of the actual town that I have planned, so it's way too big actually. So that's why I wanted to keep it a little bit muted, so that all the expenses weren't into the size of the church and not the decorations of the church. So that it kind of still makes sense why there's this huge church in this, well, relatively small town. Because of course, when you have a large town, then there's a lot of money available to build a huge church, because it's kind of like a symbol and statement for how strong and proud the village, town slash city or whatever was. So let's just say the church of Isla la Pacífica is just way too big actually for the town itself. So kind of kept the Baroque art and all muted. I actually tried to build a statue. Let's just say, don't let me build a statue. It looks like a mutated egg of some sort. But let's just say that it was in the end fun to actually build, because it's, as I said, it's difficult to build a new art style, even though Baroque is kind of has like familiar points to me because of Dianopolis. But I actually really like that it's just like, it's challenging, and I don't feel like, oh, I'm just doing the same thing. Even though the color of the church actually is kind of similar to all the buildings in Kayan al-Bashar. And I do have to mention that even though there might be 2 episodes of Isla la Pacífica coming, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be an episode of Kayan al-Bashar. It will just be in addition to that episode of Kayan al-Bashar. So this also answers that question that I got in the last episode of like, is there like only going to be one video, or like that person like to have more videos? There will be potential for more videos. It's just whenever like creativity hits me, that we will have 2 videos. But now I need to talk about these fake facades, because I'm Dutch, so I'm a little bit, let's just say, I love fake facades, because let's just move to Amsterdam, because no, actually I really like this one, actually more so than the fake facades or like the, well, just the roofs that we have in Amsterdam, because I just like this color scheme a lot more. I don't know why, but I like beige buildings just a lot more than all the buildings that we have in Amsterdam and just all of the Netherlands. It's a lot more inviting, a lot more warm, so that's also a little bit the reason why I voted, or at least decided on this beigeish color. Not just because I really like the color beige for some reason. I think most of the buildings that I've built so far are beige, but yeah, it's also really inviting, and again, that was really the point of the churches or Baroque art, because the church wanted to get the people back into the church. So I'm not saying that all of Baroque art was meant for that, but at least all of it employed by the Catholic Church was, well, not all of it, but most of it was meant to draw people back into the church. At least if my history knowledge serves me correct. Again, if I'm ever saying anything that's even remotely wrong, please do say it down below in the comments, because I would rather be called out on something that I got wrong than wallow around in my ignorance. I also have to mention that, yes, we are building a Spanish colonial town. I do know the colonial period, let's just say for most people, sucked. For a few people that were mostly in control, it was a good period, but for most people it sucked. We will get into those darker aspects of that period later on in the project, because I think it's better to acknowledge them and just know that those aspects were just completely wrong instead of just wiping them away under the rug. So we will get into that, but I think it's not really relatable when we come to building a church. And also I try to keep these videos a little bit more lighthearted. Although I did start this video actually by saying that you need to feel guilty. So that's actually a lie. I just ramble around and just see what comes around. Although I actually sometimes do censor swear words. Mostly when I just get things wrong. There's usually like the take or the commentary that you get, it usually takes 2 hours to get. I do make them unscripted, but sometimes I just mess up and then let's just say the curse words start flying when I do that. Also, no, there's not like a blooper reel of like every time I got them wrong. I usually delete those right after because I'm somewhat pissed off at myself then. But back to the actual church building because I'm getting way off track again. So these doors are actually pretty easy, or at least were not easy to build. They were just fun to build because they look like they have been there for some time. The wood just looks weathered. I think these are like these East Asian unpainted or something wooden pieces, but they just look great for doors, especially if we want to have an older looking building. Those planks and beams look just great. Also, yes, I'm building some, I think you still can call them buttresses, just not the flying kind. And they are not really necessary for the church, because the church I think is not big enough to really need those. But I just wanted to add a little bit extra to the roof. I mean, we already have the fake facade, so building an extra somewhat unnecessary buttress wasn't really that big of a deal. Also, Baroque was really just in your face, having like these entire marble clad buildings, so having a few well, not flying, but just a few unnecessary buttresses just to make the roof look great, I think I get a pass on that. Because the rest of the church actually, as I said before, is not really that heavily decorated. Most of the, let's just make a backstory behind the church because I like to do that kind of thing with buildings. But most of the money went into the size of the church, and then when it came to detailing the church, the coffers of the town were empty. So yes, the church is way too big, but it's very demure, very humble, and actually it's very inviting. Like I said, like feel guilty, but this church just feels like you're, I don't know, getting some kind of like, let's just say that it's just yeah, it just feels like some place where you go home after for like a very big family dinner or something. Like it just feels really inviting, mostly because of that color, because I can't stop building beige buildings. If I ever, well actually the buildings of the Caribbean most likely are going to be very brightly colored, because I don't know actually why. Why are the buildings in the Caribbean so brightly colored, or at least in, well, these more like Spanish countries? Because let's just say the streets in Havana look very pretty. They look very colorful. Actually, most of the Caribbean looks very colorful. So I'm wondering why that is. Because most of the Baroque style buildings in Europe are beige. Yeah, let's just see where I got that color beige from. Yeah, the other buildings, like mostly the just houses of the town that I still haven't named, but so far it's just Isla la Pacífica because it just only has a church right now. But most of them will be very brightly colored. And here is where we, or at least I, went insane. Because as I said, the church actually started out small. I actually planned to only have what we have built so far. What we are building right now, which is basically the sport or the lower walls for a massive dome, was an addition because I don't know actually from what church I saw it. It's not really one of the churches that I took as a reference or inspiration. It was just a church in the Caribbean that I randomly came across. But yeah, I started building a dome. And then later on, the dome felt a little bit out of balance with the rest of the church, so then my mind was just like, oh yeah, let's make the church larger, then it will be in balance. Which it did, but then, you know, it ended up being way too big for the town. So, fun times. This is why I maybe shouldn't really build when I'm like on a building high or like really in the mood to build, because I usually tend to overlook things like, oh, this building might be too large, because I just continuously add things to the building. So this dome, or at least the base structure for the dome that we're building right now, yeah, let's just say I wanted to build it, I started building it, and I didn't think of the consequences of like, oh, maybe this building will then be too big for the actual village. And also, this is something that I was kind of surprised by, but then I really sort of slowly transformed a little bit. But when I think of a church, I usually think of those huge stained glass windows. Yes, somehow I brought stained glass into the commentary again, although this time we're actually building a church, so it makes a little bit more sense. But when I looked at the churches in the Caribbean, well, actually not just churches in the Caribbean, but just Baroque churches, the windows didn't look that huge. So they might have been used because maybe perspective played a fool of me, but let's just say they looked smaller than I remember. So that was a little bit of like, oh, I can't build those huge windows. Later on I still built them a little bit larger than what should be the actual size, just because I wanted to have larger windows. And already this church doesn't really make sense for the size of the town that it's in, but let's just move on from that. Actually, I can make up a backstory of the church, like the town is too small, but the church is way too big. Maybe it's because the Isla la Pacífica is a certain saint connected to the island, so a lot of, how do you call them, pilgrims and such come to Isla la Pacífica just to see like the relics of that certain saint. This is actually the reason why I wanted to build that statue that ended up looking like a mutated egg or a melted egg. Yeah, again, don't let me build statues. I can't do it for some reason. Like, I had a lot of reference pictures of like saint statues and monks and everything. Still looked like a mutated egg. Also, all the roofs that I built from now on are actually not the roofs that we end up with. Because this, well, with the roofs I mean this dome and then the bell tower that we built later on. Or at least the roof of the bell tower that we built later on. It was a bit of a contradiction, because this dome actually ended up being too small. The bell tower, or the roof of the bell tower, ended up being too big. So one was scaled down, one was scaled up. However, the crosses that are on the dome and on the bell tower remain the same actually. It was interesting actually to build these crosses, because let's just say I did not really know which pieces were going to go into it, but once I got those pieces, it actually went very fast. And for the bell tower, well, it's actually a roof that I ripped straight off the bell towers of a church in Cartagena in Colombia. I'm again butchering the pronunciation of that name, but I basically ripped it off a church there. I think if you search Church Colombia Cartagena, you will immediately get the church. I think it's maybe the most well-known church then of Cartagena. I don't know if it's the main church, but yeah, let's just say this roof was interesting. I did not know how to build it until I saw that if you take it apart, it has some similarities with how I built the roofs in Osaru. So in the end, it's ended up being a little bit easier. Also, I can actually still name this building a church instead of a cathedral, because from what I know, and I'm not that much of like a, well, religious person, I would say, the only difference between a cathedral and a church is the person presiding over it. So this could still be a church because there's not an archbishop or whoever should preside over a cathedral. So I can still name this a church. So yeah, that's the whole excuse behind the church being way too big, but still being named the church and still somewhat fitting in with the rest of Isla la Pacífica. But anyway, I've set up some after video views of the finished product, so we're going to talk about those right now. So there are two things I need to state. One is something that we built, or at least I built off screen, which is, yes, a gallows, a pillory, and actually an executioner's block so people can get beheaded, because the Church of Isla la Pacífica does sit at the town square, which is usually the place where this happened, and I like to have that darker aspect so that it looks a little bit more realistic. Also, there are going to be a lot of stairs going up to the church, because I'm going to try and keep elevations in Isla la Pacífica the same, so there's not going to be a lot of terraforming, there's not going to be surprise mountains or something like that. But that does mean that I will have to be creative with the pathing and all of that and the buildings, because let's just say there's a lot of hills and not a lot of flat ground in Isla la Pacífica. But in the end, I really do like the church. It might not sit at the right location, because I do think that the back of the church should face the east, but the back of the church actually faces west. But let's just say I really wanted to have the lighting of the sun in Planzu really hit the front of the church, so yeah, the church is already too big and now it also faces the wrong direction, but I'm not going to change it because let's just say, looking at the church, I think I get a pass for how it looks, especially with the lighting. I really just love how it looks. And yes, your eyes are not lying. There is some color in the windows, those are just some carpets, but I wanted to have something to make me think of stained glass. I'm never going to leave stained glass behind. But anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. Again, if you want to see the governor's mansion or the entrance of Isla la Pacífica in the next episode, do put it down below in the comments, and then we will build whatever you guys decide on. Because I really just want to build boats, but I just can't build all of them at the same time. And there might be a second episode of Isla la Pacífica this week, but otherwise I will take your answers from the comments down below into next week. So anyways, I hope to see you back in the next video. If you do like this video, don't forget to hit the like button because it does help out a lot. And I wish you all an amazing day. Bye bye!